Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, and I'm joined currently by...
This is my Trump impersonation. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be here all week.
This is the kind of comedy genius people tune in for on Redirect. Yeah. Matthew Archambault, a fellow...
It's funny because he has COVID. That's why.
Right. We're going to be joined by Holly Cooper. She's
thankfully
soon. Somebody smart will be on this podcast very shortly. But I do want to say I do have one hot take before we get into it. We're going to talk about the Inspector General report on family separation. We're going to talk about expedited removal. We're going to talk about so many things very strongly. I wanted to talk about Trump and this thing I keep seeing, which is people saying, oh my God, he's on steroids. Oh my God, he's losing his mind. And I don't know about you.
He's totally irrational. I can't believe he's tweeting so much.
Oh, he's tweeting a lot. Oh my, he can't make a coherent thought. Listen, I don't know about you, Matthew, but I listen to a lot of Trump, and I have for a while now. I mean, rallies and press conferences and this sort of thing. He doesn't sound materially, in my opinion, any different at all from how he sounded since the birther thing. Go back and watch the birther interviews. It's not like he was some, real clear-minded fellow back in the day. And the birther thing was just as crazy and outlandish and made up as anything he's saying now about Hillary's emails and Obamagate or whatever. I mean, it's cut from the same cloth. And I'm not just like annoyed that I knew he was crazy earlier than other people, but I think it's actually a dangerous narrative to promote this idea that, oh, well, he's on steroids and now he's lost his mind, because it provides an escape hatch for people who have promoted and followed him for the last 4 years, don't you think?
Yeah, well, it is kind of funny to watch, right? Because there's like S.C. Cupp, who was on Twitter. She's the atheist, kind of conservative, kind of real talker who's on CNN now.
Right.
He tweeted, "We should all be concerned about the president's mental fitness." So I just had to correct it, and I said, we should have all been concerned about the president's mental fitness since at least 2015.
Right.
Right, because this is not new. Now, he may be a little bit more manic now than usual,
I don't know.
I don't know if it's about steroids, I mean, it's kind of hard, though, to judge. I mean, he's maybe a little bit crazier and than normal.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I mean, it's just like, if he is, it's nothing unexpected, right? I mean, it's not like, remember, he used to go out there and rant and rave about Obama's birth certificate.
Exactly.
I mean,
not just like, okay, here's the thing about the birther thing. Not just like, wow, I wonder, I'm just asking questions, but he went on CNN and said that he had private investigators who had uncovered really huge news, and it would be coming out this is like a pretty elaborate, specific lie. And it turned out to all be bullshit. And so I would like to hear the clip of Trump that couldn't have been from a year ago. Like, what is something he said when people are like, oh, he's hopped up on drugs? He probably is.
I mean, there is that little fishy thing. Have you heard this one?
No. Oh, right. The smelt. No, but he mentioned the smelt. He had that exact same rant like a month ago. So like none of this stuff is new or all that different. And again, the problem is, if he gets blown out and if he turns out to have, serious health concerns, I'm afraid that it creates a situation where like we don't have to really take a close look at what Trumpism was or how we got there, because the right's going to be able to say, actually, Trump was a great president and he got slammed with this thing from China Not his fault. And then to the extent that he declined, it was a cognitive thing that was outside of his control or whatever. It creates this nice little off ramp. I'm not sure that people will take it, but I'm really weary of people saying like, oh, well, now there's been a change of circumstance. Now things are different. Before he was presidential or whatever, but now he's crazy. If he was on steroids and coming out and like, I don't know, saying that he's the strongest man alive and going off on these weird,
ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it.
You're going to test it?
Supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, this is pre-steroids, people. Pre-steroids. This is pre-COVID, okay?
Right.
So maybe the difference is he was saying that while not coughing. And maybe that's like the
cough. The cough and the wheezing is the only material difference. And it's not even, I don't know.
The bleach. So maybe that makes it sound scary.
It does do a number on the lungs. That is true. That part is true. Anyways, so
good hot take.
I'm here to promote the idea. It is important for people to not come out and say, wow, look at drugged out Trump. Oh, wow, this is no. We should be posting. Honestly, this is my strategy. Posting clips of him from the campaign saying, I don't have foreign policy advisors because I have a very big brain. All these things that he's been saying for a while so that people understand it was crazy from the beginning to support Trump, and it's crazy now to support Trump, with all due respect to those who think he's great. That's all I've got. Matthew, you have anything else before we...
No, but we have a great show. Holly Cooper is on, and she's a great advocate, a great attorney, a great professor. Yeah. And I can't believe we tricked her to being on the show. So enjoy. So how's your day?
Are you eating or typing?
I'm typing.
Oh, okay.
Working. We're not recording, are we? Right?
Well, I'm recording, but that's okay.
Oh, okay. Who cares? You know what? People should understand that we are practicing attorneys working.
During the show.
Yeah.
We've got a good guest coming up and two interesting topics. I want to read you something, though,
something that's not interesting.
Something uninteresting. So I've got a sister who suddenly has become some sort of Trump apologist. She defriended me on Facebook. So we're no longer...
Your sister?
Yeah.
Wow.
And I'm snarky sometimes, and I've commented on things, but I don't think I ever crossed the line. One thing about some of these Trump folks is that they're a little snowflakey. They don't like to actually be forced to defend their ideas. So she's sort of putting this stuff out there, but then she will immediately retreat and say, like, I'm not trying to get into an argument. I'm just, coming into your comments or posting these.
Joe Biden's a rapist and he's a child molester.
Yeah.
And don't even come back at me.
Exactly. So there's a lot of stuff. Anyways, she posted this screed about how great Trump is. So there's a bunch of stuff about Trump being a breath of fresh air. You think Trump hates immigrants. I know Trump is married to an immigrant.
Booyah. I didn't even think of that. You know what?
Case closed.
Yeah, this whole thing's been a lie. Man, I'm sorry. Because I've never known a U.S. citizen to have animus towards immigrants or women or minorities when they've been married to one.
Right.
There's not one misogynist that's out there that's married. It's just impossible.
Let's just say this, because I want to be nice. I don't think she'll listen to this, but I want to be nice, and I'll just say that's a bad argument, and we'll leave it there.
It's not the best.
You see Trump putting an end to immigration in America. I see Trump welcoming immigrants to America legally, all caps. Now this one,
like his wife.
his wife. This one is just factually wrong, right? It would be one thing if you had a president who said, we're going to build the wall, we're going to put federal troops on the border, we're going to really clamp down on illegal immigration, and we're at the same time going to inject new blood and life into the legal immigration system. That's not what has happened. If anything, the attack on legal immigration has been more vigorous than the attack on illegal immigration. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and we don't really get into like the whole employment side and all that because we don't do that. We don't understand it.
Too hard for us.
Quite frankly, it's kind of fucking boring.
It's kind of
honest. Right. But seriously, we could do like a series of 10 shows about the way that he's impeding or ending legal immigration, and we would probably need more. Mm-hmm. So it is not as sexy, I guess, as some of the stuff we talk about, like restricted H-1Bs and all these other things I'm not even going to pretend I know about. But it's serious. And when we look at long-term consequences to the United States, to our standing in the world, the more drastic effect might be from the legal side. Because think about it. If you're a foreign student, and let's say you're smart, not like us, right? And let's say you're from India, and you're thinking, I want to come to the United States, I want to get some technical training, maybe go to MIT so I can, be some type of scientist or some type of computer whiz and all that. And you start to learn about all the bullshit that goes with coming here. They have universities in Germany and other parts of the world that can be just as good as ours and with less of the hassle. So when they're done at those universities, maybe they'll be staying there, increasing that country's wealth of knowledge. So,
right. Well, this also sort of contradicts with the first point that, he loves immigrants because he married one. The process that Melania would have gone through is demonstrably more complicated and difficult, and for many people now impossible because of Trump. So there's also this kicking away the ladder aspect of his immigration policy.
Well, if he was petitioning for her today, he would have to show his tax returns, which is hilarious, right?
Right.
And he would have to reveal, he's had 6 bankruptcies. So
right.
I don't know. And
all that, right.
Would he make enough? I guess
that's a good
he'd
point.
probably be okay.
But unlike at the time that he applied for her, he would have to list his debts. He has assets, but they're going to make a determination based on the totality of the circumstances. So that whole process now has changed thanks to him in a way that I don't think Melania would be disqualified, but many other people just trying to do it the right way, as they say, would in fact be disqualified. So this idea that what he's really trying to do is just encourage legal immigration is false. There's a couple more, but we've got a guest today.
And she's super smart.
Yep.
Like all our guests, right? We have really good guests, I do have to say, for some reason.
I had a couple of dummies.
That's true.
Hi, is this Holly Cooper?
This is she.
Can we call you Professor? I like that.
No.
Okay. Never mind. That was Steven's idea, actually.
I don't know if you had your joke hat on. You can call me whatever you want.
Okay.
All right, Your Honor. So we're joined now by Holly Cooper. Tell the folks at home a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a lawyer, and I also teach at the UC Davis Immigration Law Clinic. And we run a clinic where we have about 24 students, and we focus primarily upon the rights of detainees and the intersection between the criminal justice system or injustice system and immigrants. So we do a lot of federal litigation, and we also do a lot of training on Padilla advisals for students who want to become criminal defenders.
I see. So we were just talking about a Facebook post by my sister. You know how Facebook has somehow become like this right-wing swamp. It's just all Ben Shapiro and right-wing media. Do you know about this? Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I'm from Texas, so yes.
Okay, yeah. So this
born and raised in Texas, so I've seen the swamp and the QAnon kind of sort of conspiracy theories that are sort of being perpetrated through Facebook and social media.
It's wild, yeah. So my sister went from being sort of apolitical as recent as, a couple of years ago. And she just posted this thing about immigration, which, she defriended me, so I can't actually see this, but I got a screen grab from somebody else. And she's talking about all these different things. We've gone through a couple with Matthew. She says, you see Trump's cages at the border. I see Obama's cages at the border.
Zing.
Which, as we know, two wrongs make a right. And if Obama, the president that they all loved, did something, then it must be okay for Trump to do it. But that kind of does lead us into what we wanted to talk about, which is this Inspector General report on the child separation policy. So, Matthew, did you read this article about the Inspector General's report?
Yeah, well, so very short. I think people are kind of aware of the child separation issue and how it was framed, right? Trump, big bad guy. And it was easy. There were a lot of villains, right? Donald Trump, Jeff Sessions, Stephen Miller, for those a little bit more in the weeds, Gene Hamilton. And it was easy to put these guys as almost like evil, cartoonish figures, right? And people have had this sense or hope or belief that there were people like within the Department of Justice and within the executive branch that were reasonable, that would, be able to stand up to these types of atrocities. And what the Inspector General report comes in and says is that Rod Rosenstein is kind of emblematic of that kind of guy. Like, he's still a serious government guy, but boy, he kind of plays it straight down the middle. And, you can't really trust him, but, he's not evil. He's not that cartoon evil. And what you find out from the Inspector General report is he was every bit as evil as Jeff Sessions. He was pushing these frontline prosecutors to prosecute and separate children. And
right.
It just
let's set the table. Holly, why don't, for people who maybe like my sister, who are just sort of thinking the separation is separation and whatever Obama did at first, let's set the groundwork and explain what exactly this policy was.
Yeah, I mean, to explain to people like your sister that sort of do the what about Obama is, well, I've worked through every administration on immigration law since Clinton. So I agree that there were family separations and there were mass deportations under Obama. But I also think that we're in an evolutionary period in this country. And I think that the left is becoming more aware than ever of the immigration policies and the dramatic impact that they have on the lives of our clients or people who are at the border seeking to come to this country. Having said that, and having witnessed personally firsthand family separations under the Obama administration, I believe still that what we saw under the Trump administration was 100 times worse in its vastness and in its inhumanity towards children and parents, and even the people who were advocating for them. Almost every public defender and immigration lawyer or advocate or paralegal or translator that witnessed this is suffering to this day. And some people have gotten out of the law entirely. So there's just like a massive trauma.
I just want to point out that you're saying it was worse, right? And this is something we talk about a lot. Things can be bad, but then they can be worse. And this is a concept that seems to really kind of fly above people's heads.
Yeah. I mean, I think in its vastness, it's not worse for the individual kids, right, that were separated under Obama or Clinton or Bush, but the vastness of it, then the number of people impacted by it, what I saw was worse. So I think that kind of going back to sort of the genesis of this policy was just taking a zero tolerance approach towards prosecuting people for misdemeanor entries into this country. And, what you hoped was that there was some level of humanity within the Department of Justice, I never thought that. I thought that anybody that was working under this administration that didn't walk away and denounce it was complicit. I never had hope for any level of humanity because there's no way that you can work under that type of administration and be a human being. So anybody in the Department of Justice that didn't walk away from this, in my mind, is complicit, if not contributing to, human rights violation.
Yeah, well, the administration tried to frame this as, look, the law says it's a misdemeanor to illegally enter the United States. All we're doing is deciding to prosecute it 100% of the time. And so Kirstjen Nielsen used to say, there's not a child separation policy. There's not a child separation policy. Child separation just happened to be this obvious and predictable, and as we understand from this report, a known secondary effect of this strict enforcement is, what happened.
Yeah, I would disagree with that because there's evidence that we've received through litigation, through FOIA, that said that this was a specifically orchestrated policy that intended to deter migration. And so we have evidence of that. We know that this wasn't just about enforcing the law 100% unilaterally without regard to how old a child is. We know that this was done as a punitive, cruel measure so that people would no longer migrate to this country to seek protection. So it was done in a way that was highly publicized and done for a very strategic purpose, and that is to deter migration to the United States border. And so I really take issue with anybody that says that this was just about law and order, and we got to keep law and order at the border.
Yeah, I mean, that is what the IG report says. It says exactly that. But I think it's kind of hopefully eye-opening to people who wanted just to put this on, a certain group of people when really it was institutional, right? And because someone like Rod Rosenstein could have stopped it, right? There were people along the line. And I think there were some U.S. attorneys who refused to go along with it, and, kudos to them. But I think what is kind of chilling is the willingness of people that are in the Department of Justice, in the executive branch, that will span administrations, right? So these are all like people installed by Trump that are willing
They're called career employees.
Yeah, they're willing to follow any order set down to them. And in a moment, we're going to talk about the expansion of expedited removal, which is chilling when you put it into that context. But hopefully people pay attention to the IG report and understand that these are not just the cartoon, because we can make Stephen Miller as evil as we want, right? But he's not the one implementing. He's the one telling them or putting out the policy. But the ones that are implementing it are the real issue.
There's, just to get into some of the specifics, there's a phone call early on when Jeff Sessions says, we need to take away the children. If people care about kids, then don't bring them in. We won't give amnesty to people with kids, which, Holly, this gets to what you're saying, that contrary to the sort of PR spin the administration has tried to put on it, the separation wasn't like an oopsie, like, oh my God, we did this thing and it turns out this bad thing happened as a result. But in fact, the driving force behind the policy was the separation. And then what ends up happening is some of the federal prosecutors on the ground who actually had to, file charges in these cases declined to prosecute in a couple of cases because the kids were really young. They didn't want to, separate kids that were probably infants or babies. And that's when they got the call from Rod Rosenstein to say, look.
Right. Well, Rod had also, previous to that, even more context, is that he had previously said, hey, you know what? If the prosecutors didn't have to do this, and if they did that, that's their own problem, and tried to kind of wiggle his way out of culpability. And then I think that really made some line prosecutors mad, because as you're getting ready to probably say, is that he sent a direct communique to the line prosecutors who were saying, hey, you know what? We should take age into consideration because there's nursing mothers, there's infants of tender age, very young children being separated. And he said he didn't care like the age shouldn't be a factor.
Right.
So his prior attempt to like exculpate and walk away with clean hands now has been proven to just to be a lie.
Right. That's exactly what he did. He calls and says no exceptions. Doesn't matter how young the child is. And you're right. He later says, when he gets called out, he says, if any United States attorney ever charged a defendant they did not personally believe warranted prosecution, they violated their oath of office. He's totally throwing these low-level prosecutors completely under the bus. So here you have a situation where the prosecutors who carried through these orders are pointing the finger up. And the report indicates, some people are saying, look, we were just following the president's orders. People are pointing their fingers all the way to the top. But then you also have people like Rosenstein saying, well, they're ultimately the ones who carried these things out. And if they weren't comfortable with it, that's on them. It's just a bunch of finger pointing. But as Matthew is pointing out, every one of these people is a cog in the machine. I agree with you, Holly. If you didn't become a whistleblower immediately and step down and refuse to participate, then there's no amount of finger pointing you can do to get out of being responsible for what happened.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this, too, is just really about people maybe in hindsight feeling enormously guilty, these line prosecutors. It sounds like one of them has even left the federal government, is now doing a private practice. But, sometimes in that moment, maybe they're making these judgment calls, and I think that they're having a lot of remorse for it. So like we can sit around and we can blame Stephen Miller, Rod Rosenstein, the attorneys, but at the end of the day, they all executed this plan and they didn't have to. Nobody told them they had to do this. So they're all culpable in my mind.
Right. I think it's important for people like my sister to know also that the type of prosecutorial discretion that we would advocate for in a case like this, like, hey, this lady is nursing a baby, maybe we don't take her baby away, is exercised all the time in every other context of law enforcement. If you pull somebody over as a cop and they're driving without a license and they've got like a screaming baby in the back seat, you don't have to arrest that woman. Like you could under the law. It would be in some, places legal for you to do that. But we also want police officers and prosecutors and judges to weigh the circumstances, right? And that cop's probably thinking, well, I don't want to deal with the crying baby and this would be unnecessarily cruel. And so I'm not going to. And so to just strictly enforce this one law against this one group of people, specifically to send a message, is cruel and wrong. So.
Yeah, but I think what is healthy for immigrant advocates to do is to also recognize the harm that the Democratic Party has also caused. Because I think your sister is right in some ways. Because in order for this country to move forward, this has not been a partisan issue. I mean, we've made it one through Trump and they've made it one. But like what we have is a history of centuries in this country of family separations. You start with the Native Americans. You start with the enslaved persons who were brought here forcibly. You talk about the Japanese internment camps, the Chinese Exclusion Act. We have a history in this country that goes above partisanship of family separation. And Obama has accountability as well, because deportation is a form of family separation, as well as I saw people on the border being separated. I think that we need to also recognize and not whitewash history.
Sure.
Because we can't move forward under Biden with the same sort of like, well, it's partisan, so they're going to do the right thing.
Right.
Because we've seen the harm that's done. And what we need to really do is talk about a new generational approach to criminal justice, to immigration laws. And I think that's what we need to recognize. I don't think it's worth it to fight people on Obama, because
right.
I think that in some ways they're very right,
Right.
And I think that when we acknowledge that, we make it not about partisanship, but about, humanity, and say, you're right, that did happen. And we need to come together and figure out a better way to do this.
Now, I remember, because we had a podcast back then, nobody listened to it, but it exists. That's like a tree falling in the forest and nobody to hear it, right? Did the podcast exist before anyone listened to it? So we talked a lot about this. There was the Obama camp who was saying, put your knives away because the alternative is worse. And we've got to kind of give him space to push through immigration reform. And there was just a lot of reluctance to criticize him sharply because he was viewed as being sort of roughly on our side. And, a lot of the insiders, I think, wanted to still be able to have lunch with him and had met him and probably personally liked him. And so I'm wondering, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves by assuming who wins in this upcoming election, but if Biden were to win, how do we avoid going into the Biden administration with people who are suddenly calling for us to not rock the boat and continuing with this mentality of like, if you criticize Biden, that's only going to help the Republicans. So how do we avoid that? And how can we be more constructive in pushing the left towards a more humanitarian approach on immigration?
Yeah, and also think that a part of the calculation will be like congressional seats and Senate seats. So like how much leeway we can get to pushing through a more humanitarian approach to immigration and to people who are being prosecuted for crimes. I've never really taken an apologist approach. I've seen a narrative change over my 25 some odd years in this area of law. And I'm really hopeful. Like I used to just talk about the fact that I work with people with felony convictions and 80% of the room was in disagreement. And these were pretty hardcore immigration advocates, right? You don't see that anymore. People are just very willing to engage with a humane approach also to people with felonies, to people who have a green card in this country. So I think that the narrative has totally changed in the advocacy community. And there's been a ton of work done in this area that on advocates, grassroots, the media as well. I think the reporting has changed entirely as well. So I'm hopeful that the starting base is going to be a much higher level of accountability for this administration. And they're going to realize that people are watching that are not of the same mindset as the advocates that were watching under Obama. I mean, I went to an ALA conference where people were going to walk out of the room or turn their back when Cecilia Munoz came in. That was like maybe 25 people. I think today, if somebody came in and tried to talk about family separation and apologize and create kind of an apologist sort of like false narrative of history, I think probably 90% of ALA would walk out, right? So I think the times have changed. People are more willing to recognize family separation, recognize that detention is an instrumentality of oppression. So I think we're in a different place now. So I'm really hopeful that we're not going to have to compromise like we did, or not we, but some people did with Obama.
Well, I am hopeful too, but also I'm wary because it's one thing to be on the outside banging the drum. And then once you're kind of let in, a lot of people will put down that drum, right? And then all of a sudden it's about team. Mm-hmm. But I think there are enough advocates who have been, or I don't know, say radicalized, or really energized and inspired, and who've learned a lesson from Obama. Because when Obama was elected, I was really hopeful, right? I was hopeful. Mm-hmm. And even at the beginning, it's like, okay, kind of understand that makes sense. Okay, we got to do health care and, we'll get around to it. But as it went on, I think a lot of us realized like, okay, he either does not have our best interests at heart or he doesn't really care too much about it. And I think if Biden were to be elected, I think it's really important that we keep the pressure on. And I agree with you, Holly. I think that will happen. I do think you're going to get those people who are going to kind of like, okay, our guy's in and we have to give him time and all that. But, they can it off.
All right.
Yeah.
And Holly, we do have a producer, so you're welcome to swear. It will get bleeped. So,
okay.
Just so you know.
They always said about me on the borders, I dress like Swiss Miss, but I cuss like a sailor. So,
okay.
I'm trying to hold it back here.
All right. Well, no, just let loose is what I'm saying. You just let it fly.
Okay.
Well, I did want to talk real quick, and I don't want to take too much of your time. We really appreciate having you on. It helps when there's somebody smart who comes on. It just elevates the discourse, which isn't hard. I mean, pretty much anyone we have on elevates the discourse. But when somebody smart comes on,
Stephen's sister's on next week. So.
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to talk about the expansion of expedited removal. So Holly, do you want to give our listeners, our non-lawyer listeners, or even maybe our bad lawyer listeners, or Matthew in that case, a brief explanation of what expedited removal has traditionally been?
Yeah, so expedited removal, because I've seen all the different gradations throughout my career, but essentially it's like you get to put somebody in this quick removal process. It's like you can get like what we used to call on the border a quick deportation order, without like all the trappings of a courtroom, that you can just sort of screen somebody at the border, or if they're at sea, that also applies to people at sea. Like, you know, if there are people coming in from Haiti, you can just quickly screen them and then send them straight back to their home country.
Right.
At some point, we started to require that screening of individuals a test for whether they were afraid to go back to their home country. And if they were afraid to go back, those individuals got put into like a mini sort of secondary process of screening for their asylum claim. And they were interviewed by an asylum officer. And if they passed that, then the door opened to the courtroom and they were let in to put on a full trial of their asylum case. And so essentially this expedited process, this quick deportation process, applied to people caught at sea. It also applied to people caught within 100 miles of the United States border, and they were caught within 14 days of their entry into the United States. And so that was how it's traditionally, the shape it's traditionally taken.
I do want to add one sort of element of this is that there's permanent consequences that can follow this person into the future, trigger certain bars and things like that. And also virtually no real review of the process. So Matthew actually referred a client to me a few years ago, a mom speaker from Guatemala. She doesn't speak Spanish, but the expedited removal paperwork says that the officer conducted the interview in Spanish. And these are like fairly complex questions with lengthy answers, supposedly, with a woman who, again, does not speak Spanish. And we tried to get the expedited removal order overturned. And at the time, the way to do that was essentially to ask Border Patrol to like undo it. And we had proof that, hey, she doesn't speak Spanish and so on and so forth. And they basically just said no. So on top of being quick and devoid of any real rights or due process, it's also extraordinarily hard to sort of overcome later on.
Yeah. Definitely, 100%. And we may see more obstacles after the Supreme Court's ruling, but to get like a review of that expedited removal process is very difficult. There were some limited ability to get quick review from an immigration judge, but the judicial review, at least for people at the border right now, of that is going to be very difficult after the Supreme Court has sort of kind of even more narrowed the universe of the Constitution and to whom it applies.
Good thing this is only a border thing, because people like me in Philadelphia and New Jersey, we won't have to worry about it, right?
Well, I mean, I'm assuming there's borders up north, but yeah, but I don't know. I've never been up that far. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, it's traditionally been, but it also deals with people at sea too. So you can kind of see some use of it, you know, in South Florida. But yeah, traditionally you see, like, I would probably venture to say the clear vast majority of cases are individuals arriving at the border. And probably your follow-up question is going to be about the expansion of this process into the interior of the United States.
Exactly.
Yeah. So now what we're seeing is that the U.S. government now is seeking to expand this quick sort of deportation or expedited removal process throughout the United States. And the statute has sort of always contemplated this possibility, but most administrations have just kind of applied it within 100 miles of the border. And now what we're going to see is that this quick deportation process can happen anywhere in the United States for anyone that's apprehended if they essentially can't show that they've been in the United States for the last 2 years. And so there's sort of been litigation with respect to this policy and its rollout, and wonderful organizations sued, and they initially won like a freeze of the ruling, what we call as lawyers a preliminary injunction. I believe that got overturned in the DC circuit. So now they're talking about possibly rolling this out even as soon as this weekend, from what I've understood, in some of the sanctuary cities, perhaps. It's unclear. These threats have been made before and not followed through, so I don't want to create panic. But on the other hand, there's a lot of questions about giving an immigration arresting officer the type of authority to determine if the person that they're arresting has been in the United States for 2 years. And it's going to give them extraordinary powers that we've probably never seen in the interior of the United States. But part of the good news is that we don't know. The constitutional question about this process remains open. And I think it's a very strong one to say that people inside the United States should have the protection of the Fifth Amendment. And, in this litigation, they haven't ruled on it yet. So if they do start expanding it, we're hopeful that the courts will agree with us that the Constitution should protect the individuals inside the country, and that this process hopefully will be deemed a violation of the Constitution.
But the way they're contemplating using it, though, and this is to fall back to my previous comment about how people within the machine, so to speak, may not be acting in everyone's best interest or ethically. Certainly one can envision ICE sweeping someone off the street, taking them to their office. They don't have right to counsel. They're not guaranteed a phone call for anyone, and not being able to prove that they've been here for 2 years and being expeditedly removed out of the country, even if they've been here for 20 years, right? And so what's to stop them from doing that? And are we going to rely on the good people like Rod Rosenstein's, within the government to stand up to this? Obviously, we can't rely on that. So luckily, we have people like Holly and people like her that are so talented and such talented litigators that they can fight these out. But all these fights, even when our side is successful, people are hurt and people are going to get hurt. And it's really chilling to see that, we're on the precipice of these types of actions.
Right.
No, I totally agree with you, because when we give line officers a glut of power, we always see abuse of that power.
Right.
And so to give them this level of unreviewable power is like making them the judge, jury, executioner. And there's going to be very, very limited review of that enormous power unless that individual happens to have a lawyer that's ready to file some type of federal preliminary injunction against their removal. And then that's going to be very difficult to do. And so a lot of people won't have access to that kind of quick lawyering that's going to need to happen, almost like what we saw with the travel ban when people were sitting on airplanes waiting to be deported back to Iran. And you had to file your TRO within 4 or 5 hours, right? I mean, the same type of quick action is going to be needed. But the problem will be, just as you're saying, is that people are going to be held in isolation without access to a lawyer. It's not going to be, the Muslim ban was, you couldn't access those people, but at least you could access the families in the airport waiting for them. They had their phones on the airplane, some of them. But this is going to be people held almost incommunicado. So it's going to be very, very difficult to access them, to get them the federal court quick relief that they need.
Right. I tweeted about this the other day, but here in the Ninth Circuit, I don't know if this was nationwide, but in the mid-2000s, there was a process called stipulated removal orders.
I lived through that one too.
Yeah, and it looks very much the same in that they would have, usually what would happen in practice is that the ICE officer would put on his immigration lawyer hat and say, you don't have any real options. You're going to be detained a long time. Let me just tell you right now that, you're not going to get bond or this or that or the other. Or they would say things that are false, like you can just come back and have your wife file that petition for you. But I just need you to sign this form waiving all your rights. Or they would just straight up lie about what they were signing. I've seen that too. And then people would sign this thing. And suddenly, instead of having maybe 2 or 3 options for legalization in the removal context, people would be on a plane to their home country the next day. And the Ninth Circuit eventually said, yeah, this whole process is not good. This is a violation of their due process rights. And so it's no longer practiced. But I'm just a solo practitioner in the middle of nowhere. I've seen dozens of people whose lives have been ruined by that process. And even with a favorable Ninth Circuit ruling saying, yeah, that's not allowed anymore, there's no clear remedy for people in that position. It's not totally obvious that they can undo it and get back into the position they would have been in otherwise. And so even if this sort of doesn't get fully implemented, or it's only implemented for like a little while, the potential for destroying lives is pretty high, I would say. So.
Yeah, and I would also say for the stipulated deportation, because I actually worked in a facility that did stipulated deportations, and we tried to help those individuals out. But like one thing I would say is, if immigration practitioners are listening, is to FOIA the immigration court file, because in some instances, immigration judges would come in to review the stipulated removal order. And they would bring the person into court. They wouldn't sign off on it. They would just make sure that there was informed consent. So there can be some actual like immigration judge involvement in that as well. It was super interesting. But the only reason I'm saying this is that may provide an additional remedy of a motion to reopen before the EOIR, as opposed to, the ICE office, right? So
right.
In some of those, even though the immigration judge wasn't signing the order, they were reviewing it for, make sure they were actually, qualified for the stipulated removal order and were making informed decisions. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I got a case.
But I saw thousands of those cases, right?
Right.
Bring them into court.
Right. And you've got to look at, I had one recently where the ICE officer signed the certificate of interpretation, but it was a weird certificate of interpretation, just saying like somebody read it to him in Spanish, like not me, but somebody did. And yeah, the judges often signed off on them, but motions to reopen can be hard. They can say, well, you waited too long, or you didn't exercise due diligence or whatever.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I mean, it's very problematic. So Matthew, is there anything else you want to add or talk about today?
No, it's just really nice to have Holly on. Thank you so much. I've admired your work from afar, and I think the community thanks you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow your hot takes and whatnot?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm on Twitter. Abogada Tejana, I think is my handle. I think that was just my nickname when I worked in Eloy, Arizona, actually, for my clients. But what else? I think that's it in terms of following me. I work so hard that I'm kind of, not that active, but that's where I think I'm most active on a social platform. And TikTok, I'm pretty discreet.
Okay. Don't follow her on TikTok. All right. Well, thanks again.
I won't tell you my name on TikTok.
All right.
All right.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Thank you, Holly.
Bye.
Bye.
Woo-doop. All right. Well.
Yeah. Holly Cooper.
So the good thing about a Biden administration, in theory, would be that maybe we don't get a big immigration reform or this and that or the other. But some of this stuff he could very easily undo. And
yeah, my hope is that he's elected and his administration reaches out and like gets someone like Holly, right? Or someone who had, not us, someone who has like this really deep knowledge and understanding of all the stuff that can sit back and first undo all of it and then hopefully implement some things to make things better.
Right.
We need, a Stephen Miller, right? Or a Gene Hamilton. And there are lots of us around. I mean, I don't think it would be hard to find. But, hopefully if he wins, he does that. And also, I mean, there are going to be some things that are a little harder to undo, right? Mm-hmm. But they have to take the time and to endeavor to do that and to do it right. What kind of held up the Trump administration is I don't think they had a really good, clear understanding of what they were doing at the beginning.
Of the quote unquote law.
Yeah. And now they do. And that's what's getting scary. And that's what's scary about having another 4 years.
Right.
I think they kind of have it now. Like, okay, now we know what to do. Because you see the whole thing with DACA, they could have gotten rid of DACA. DACA could be gone by now. And if they were effective in their lawyering and knowledge of the law, it would have been done.
Right.
But they screwed around and now they're kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so what an uplifting show.
Yeah, really good stuff. Good stuff. All right, we'll talk to you next week, Matthew.
Goodbye. See you. I love you.